Hi, everybody. We have a wonderful treat for you today. David Icke is back with me today. He has a new film that's just come out about his life, a new book coming out, and we're going to talk to him about a phenomenon known as the Overton Window. And the reason I've chosen that one is because people are going out of their minds and can't understand why nothing seems, quote, normal. Not that there ever was a normal, but even further off from what feels correct in our own minds and hearts. And I don't know anyone better to explain how this works, how the manipulation happens, and how to begin bringing it back than David Icke. Hi, David. So good to see you again.
Oh, you too.
David, I'm so happy for you. Your film's doing... What?
You too. Good name for a band, eh?
Yes, indeed.
No one's thought of it yet.
Smart man. David, first of all, we're going to talk just a little bit. You're just going to give us a tiny tease on your new book that's coming out, and also tell us what's been happening since the video, which is, you know, a full feature production, film production about your life has come out. But I want to go into this other topic first because we need to really get it once and for all, the means by which society is manipulated. Because right now in the U.S., we're just standing there pointing fingers at each other. We're so polarized. People are losing their minds. We've had 115 or 16 mass shootings to date this year alone in this country. You see traffic wrecks all over the place. I mean, it's common to see traffic wrecks where normally you might see one a year. We're losing our minds, David. And so do you care to dive into this topic with us a little bit, which, you know, is simply a window in which perception is accepted or not by the public, and how that window is moved?
Yeah, what they call the Overton Window, I call in the books the postage stamp consensus. This is a set of beliefs and perceptions that go under the name of the norm, what's normal, what the real world is, how things are. And perception is the stadium in which all of it's played out. The whole conspiracy to direct human society in a particular direction, which is happening all the time, the conspiracy to enslave humanity in an Orwellian state, the stadium is perception. Human perception, to hijack that and to control it. And we get our perceptions from information received. That's how people form their perceptions. They have a view of something, and so they will behave in relation to that subject or person or whatever on the basis of how they perceive them. And the perception comes from information received. So if you can control the information that the vast majority of people get, what we call, or I call anyway, the mainstream everything, then you are going to a very, very large extent control perception, which means you're going to control behavior. And you can change this postage stamp consensus, this Overton window of collective perception, by changing information. So, for instance, you look at political correctness. Political correctness has created a whole new tidal wave of information, which says you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't have this opinion, which says if you do have that opinion, we're going to censor you, and or we're going to hurl abuse at you for having a different opinion to what we're now saying is the norm. And so this window of perception can be changed by information received, but it can also be changed, of course, by information not received, which is what all this mass censorship is all about. And it can also be changed, and it is being, by people looking at the consequences of stepping outside of it. So you have this norm, And if you step off it, well, the abuse starts.
Mm-hmm.
You're either mad or bad. You're a Nazi, you're a racist, and all these things. And so what that brings about is the most insidious form of censorship of all, which is self-censorship. People just don't say it because they fear the consequences of saying it. And this combination means that this window receives only the information, overwhelmingly anyway, that would get people to perceive the world according to what the manipulators of the window want that perception to be, thus that behavior to be. And, you know, years ago, that window was policed by religion. You can't say this because it's blaspheming. You can't say this because, you know, God wouldn't like it, and all that. And so that created a window of perception, thus a window of control. Now, as certainly in the West, religion becomes less powerful in that regard, so other things have taken its place. And so for a time, mainstream science took its place. It still has to a certain extent, where you have the scientific norms saying this is how things are, and anything that challenges those is pseudoscience or crazy. And now we've moved into this so-called progressive era, whereby the traditional liberal left, from the direction that I came as a kid, liberal left that believes in freedom of speech, freedom of lifestyle. Basically, my philosophy is do what you like so long as you don't impose it on anyone else. That's the liberal left that I grew up with. That has now been hijacked, not only hijacked, but inverted. So now this so-called progressive left, what I call Soros progressives, because George Soros, the multi-billionaire, is funding it to a vast extent, now sees freedom of speech as a bad thing. It's what it basically says is, I am right, and because I am right, anyone that has a different opinion to me must by definition to be wrong. And because they're wrong, what does it matter if they don't have freedom of speech? Because they're wrong. It's like someone wrote about me once, great line, what are the benefits in allowing him to speak? All right, in public, it was talking about. This is the mentality that we're looking at. And so this window of norms has dramatically changed from, well, just from the point of view, look at comedy. I remember what comedy was like not so long ago. And now basically comedy is policed by the PC Gestapo. And so many areas of human life are not open to comedy anymore. That this window has massively changed. And what it's done, because you see, if you can control the norm of human perception, and you can dictate this window, if you like, this postage stamp consensus, you're also controlling the politicians. Because the politicians don't change society, they basically reflect it. It's the permanent government, those in the shadows, that change society. Politicians react to it. So if you're going to run for office, not least in the Democratic Party now, then if you step out of the norms that are accepted by people to be how things are and should be, then you're not going to get elected, probably. Certainly in places like California. But we should also remember that these these norms, which basically dominate the microphones and dominate the media, are not necessarily, in relation to current events, the norms and the window that vast tracts of the population actually do believe in. Or they'll censor themselves and stay within them because they fear the consequences. But privately, they don't think like that at all. And when they get the chance to rebel, if you like, against that, they'll take it. This is how Trump got it.
Right.
Trump got in telling that constituency what it wanted to hear. I'm not saying he did it genuinely, but he told them what they wanted to hear, so they voted for him in great numbers. Same with Brexit in Britain. It was an opportunity to rebel against this big change in this window of acceptability. So it's not quite as black and white, but certainly in the public arena, the norms of acceptable speech and behavior and opinion has dramatically changed in the last few years.
It has, and I want to bring something up. It's interesting. It goes back to what you said a few minutes ago. So you're talking about how we self-edit. Okay, it's self-suppression. Well, what happened when
present company accepted, by
the
way?
Of course. But what happened when Trump was elected? What was interesting is it did show the cracks in our collective psyche, because there was permission given there, and it showed the incredible amount of residual racism in this country, for example. That had been essentially suppressed. There was no real venue to voice that kind of thought for a very long period of time, particularly against African Americans, which, as you know, this is epic in our country right now. By Trump coming into office, it actually allowed that subconscious programming that never left us, really, to begin surfacing. So where does that fit into this? It was almost inadvertent that it happened, and it's really ugly, and it's really necessary that we be able to see what's lurking in our collective subconscious here.
Well, I think Trump, to an extent, has been a mirror for a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But I do think that this whole thing about racism has become a really obsessive thing.
Yes, it has.
And really, where I'm coming from is that we're all the same consciousness. We're all points of attention within the same flow of consciousness, having different experiences, and the color of your body or your background, income bracket, or whatever is not who you are. It's your experience. And therefore, it's a very brief experience. And it's one of the things I've written a lot about in the last few years, and that's this obsession with labels, with self-identity, with labels, so that we perceive who we are by the color of the body, the background, the religion, the race, and income bracket. And they're just transitory experiences which are not that much in the flow of forever. And I see
politicians' vehicles to work with by casting people against each other, which seems to be part of that agenda in moving that Overton window, is the creation of enemies for the common good of the people that are listening to you. Right? This is a big part of it. The creation of enemies.
Well, you see, what we're looking at, in my opinion, what we're looking at is an updated version of Marxism.
Yeah.
Marxism changes society to its own end, which ends up with the elite in power every time.
Right.
By playing groups off against each other. So the traditional Marxism of the past was playing off the haves against the have-nots. And at the end of the Marxist revolution, the haves were in power again in another form.
Right.
because it's all a con trick. You know, Karl Marx was not a man of the people. He was the banker's boy. So what's happened now is that self-identity groups are being played off against each other to transform society. This is one of the reasons that all this talk of racism has come up, and sexism has come up, and transphobia has come up, because what we're looking at is the playing off of groups against each other to transform society and create the classic technique of Marxism, which is creating conflict between those groups. And it's kind of fascinating to me to watch how the dynamics have changed. And this window, these norms have changed dramatically because the nature of the Marxism has changed. See, when you were playing off the haves against the have-nots, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and all this stuff, you had the division between those who had and those who had not. What's happened now with this self-identity Marxism is that have and have-nots are now put aside. They matter nothing like as much. This is why you're having this focus on whether someone's called he, she, or they, at the expense of a focus on phenomenal levels of homelessness in America and, of course, in Britain too. This has also brought about this apparent contradiction, but it's not if you play through this, of so-called social justice warriors and what I call Soros progressives in league with multi-billionaire financiers and heads of giant corporations, not least in Silicon Valley. But because the group, the Marxist group's division now is on self-identity and not overwhelmingly on have and have-nots, it means that as long as the billionaires support your self-identity group, then they're your friend, they're your mate. So what you have, you see, when the self-identity group wants to stop any criticism or questioning of itself, because I am right, and if you criticize me, you must be wrong. This is why this mentality cheers the billionaires of Silicon Valley when they censor people whose opinion they don't like. Instead of, like in the 60s, when I was growing up, watching students on the little black and white telly at Berkeley going on mass marches demanding freedom of speech, now they go on marches and protests to shut it down, to delete freedom of speech. This is the scale, going back to the theme we started out with, this is the scale of the Overton Window norms of society, the change that's taken place. And it's being funded, wake up people while you still can, Soros progressives. It's being funded by those that were funding the society that this progressive mentality says it wants to change. Mm-hmm. Why would George Soros, who said, I don't take into account the social consequences of what I do in his financing life, I'm just there to make money. Why has this person put $32 billion into the Open Society Foundations he controls and created that operate in 100 plus countries, financing the so-called progressive left? Why would someone with that mentality do that? Because he's playing them like a stringed instrument.
Yes.
And by funding this transformation of the left, he's moved the window. Because now, as the window moves, like into the acceptability of censorship, the old liberal left would have resisted that. Now the inverted Soros progressive left demands that. you see how the window can be
Yes.
manipulated by changing the mentality of those that are creating the window.
Yeah, one of the tenets I was reading about in The Shift is that if you are a given entity or group, or the media itself, whoever is controlling that message from above, is the goal is to start by taking the most extreme position and starting to inculcate that into, whether it be through the world of entertainment or the world of news, inculcate the most extreme position with the idea that in the end you're going to have it slide back to an area that everyone finds acceptable. Give us some examples of how that's being played against us even in this moment.
Well, I mean, I describe that process like this. You walk up to a gate and you push it, and that is symbolic of you introduce something that you want to happen. If there's no resistance or not enough, you walk through the gate and you go on and you go to the next gate. And if there's no resistance there, you push through that, you go to the next gate. And what we've seen, and this is what so much of this censorship is about, is that the resistance has not been there, because the traditional point of resistance to freedom being destroyed, the old liberal left, has been usurped and hijacked. So it's not pushing back against the gate anymore like it used to. You know, it is a technique whereby it's used all the time. It's used, for instance, in this country, where what they'll do is they will leak to the media an extreme position on something. The media then report that extreme, because what they're doing, this is pushing the gate.
Yes,
they're then observing what is the reaction to what's been leaked. Of course, the government says, "Oh no, this is not the case." If they get resistance, "Oh no, this is not what we were planning," and they'll pull back to something they think they're going to get away with. I mean, you look at Brexit now. What they really want, the political class in this country, the system, is to drop Brexit and just carry on as a vassal of the European Union. They know they probably won't get away with that, because given 17.4 million people voted to come out. So what they've hashed up is what they're calling Brexit, but actually hands all the aces and keeps all the aces with Brussels in terms of what Britain and British people can and cannot do. So again, their ideal is to get out altogether, but they've got a fallback position which they're trying to get through, which is we'll call it Brexit, but it's not really. It's not as much as we really wanted, but it keeps us in the web, in the net of the EU. You see this all the time.
right.
They will indicate that they're taking an extreme position, and then if they get a pushback, they'll dilute it a little bit, as much as they think they have to dilute it to get away with it. And there's another con trick used in the same regard to that, and that is you take an extreme position, a really extreme position on some subject, and you know you're going to get pushback because it's so extreme. But that's not really what you think you're going to get away with. You know you're not going to get away with that. You're going to get away with something back here. But what you do is you let the protests happen, and you let the outrage happen, and then you say, well, yes, we've listened to public opinion, and we've taken public opinion into account, and we've decided that we're not going to do this and not going to do that, which from the start you knew you weren't going to get away with at this point. And what happens is people who were protesting, they say, oh, well, at least it's not as bad as it was going to be.
Yeah, at least there's dialogue now.
Whereas if the position they expected to get was put forward first, then the resistance would be against that, and they'd have to dilute that. So they give you a much more extreme position, and then they dilute it to the point they thought they were going to get away with right from the start. So putting all this together, as I've been saying for decades, this is a psychological game. This is a mind game. It's about manipulating human perception to get what you want.
Perfectly put. Any other like tells? What I want people to go away with is understanding when they're watching these clips, whether they're watching the news or reading the newspaper or whatever the choice for the news is for them, to understand some of the tells. What you just talked about, I think, is one of the real tells. What are a couple of the other tells so people can really clearly get once and for all the more subtle, nuanced ways in which they're being manipulated? And we're going to just pass through that to an Overton Window on the subject of sexual abuse and pedophilia. We've talked about this before, but it's really coming up large now.
Well, the red flag to watch is when the mainstream media, the mainstream everything, moves as one unit.
Yes.
When they trying to sell or represent the same position on whatever subject you're dealing with the agenda. Another red flag is look at anything, any subject, my goodness me, they're increasing by the day, where you can't have an alternative opinion without getting abuse or censored. Because the simple fact is that if they can't win the debate on something, they don't have it. You know, if you know that if you have open discourse and all information, opinions are presented in the public arena, you know you're not going to win that debate. So you don't have it. You shut it down. You make any alternative opinion the subject of abuse and censorship. Look at anything. Look at mass immigration. Look at the transgender subject. Look at human-caused global warming. The list just gets longer, where you can't have another opinion without being called a racist, a bigot, or whatever. You shut the debate down. For instance, how can you win a debate that says that men and women are not biologically different? You cannot win that debate. Professors of biology come out and say, well, actually, they are different. Actually, all I've got to do is produce a mirror. Have a look at that. Yeah, have a look. Yep. You're different. Okay. And I watched a video on online about 2 months ago now, where it was a panel at a university, and there was a woman on the panel, and she simply said that men and women are different in the sense of, this is all she said, men are on average taller than women. Well,
newsflash.
It was a walkout by these people, and the camera followed the walkers outers into the lobby, and they were saying, we're not staying in there and listening to this fascism. So this is how it works. And what you're seeing when you see the way that this is progressing is they pick off milder things to start with, and then it gets more and more extreme, whether it's criticism of Israel or criticism of transgender, not being discriminatory against transgender people. I don't see that being discriminatory against anyone is anything but childlike. But we started out, it's what I call the foot in the door technique, whereby you say we must not be discriminatory against transgender people. Okay, most people would put their hands up and say, yeah, fair enough, that's okay. So you got your foot in the door, you've started it. That's just the first move. What's happening now is particularly young people and children are being systematically manipulated and indoctrinated on the basis of transgender perceptions, so that they are now questioning their gender when they weren't before. The number of particularly young girls who are questioning their gender in Britain and wanting to be another gender has increased in recent years by literally thousands of %. That has not happened by chance. It's not happened randomly. It's been brought about by programmed, manipulated design. So
It's
this is
the same in the United States, David, and one of the very sad aspects to this, I interviewed probably a couple of years ago now, this wonderful woman who became a man, so a man at this point, who explained very openly from the inside the process in their case, but talked about what happens to that culture at large, which has the highest suicide rate, I believe, of just about any demographic. And you can understand when you're talking about it from the perspective you've just mentioned of creating this cognitive dissonance within your own being, even as to your basic sexual identity. This is an issue.
Well, the thing is, this very quickly, you know if something's genuine or not by how they treat, if you like, their own.
Mm-hmm.
We give you an example. A Jewish person who criticizes the regime in Israel gets more abuse from these ultra-Zionist hate groups, censors, than does someone who is not Jewish.
That's true.
So it's not about, many examples of that in Britain recently.
Yes.
So it's not about protecting Jewish people. That's not what it's about. It's about an agenda to stop criticism of the far-right regime in Israel. And I'm just over there somewhere. I've got a book. I'm just about to start it. And it's about a man, an American man, who was pressured into literally going through the operations of changing gender. And when he changed his gender, eventually he realized what a massive mistake it was, and how actually what he perceived to be wanting to be in another body had other origins to do with his childhood. But when he started, and I've come across so many people like this, when he started to want to alert people who were thinking about it, to say, not don't do it, but hold on a minute, here are some of the drawbacks, and what is the motivation really? Look at it more deeply before you jump into a life-changing situation. And this book he's written is a book of people's stories who've been through what he went through.
What is the name of the book, David? Because people, what is the name of the book? People
I can't remember. It's not actually here. It's in my car.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
What I do, I have books in the car, and I go to cafes and stuff. And
That's where I do my research.
Where there's no phones and no disturbance and nothing that stops you getting really into it. But it's in the car, and it's about stories of people like him who went through the change and then regretted it. But those people have enormous abuse from transgender activists because they're not singing from the song sheet, because it's not about protecting transgender people. If it was, they'd say, hey, come and talk about it. Let's make sure people don't make things or do things they're going to regret. But no, it's silence them, abuse them, because they're not advancing the agenda that we want if we allow them access to tell their stories. And you see this all the time. Whenever anyone says you can't have another opinion, it's the agenda, because it's shutting down debate that it can't win.
Yes, that is, I think you stated it perfectly. It's very, very concerning, and I think all of us know people who have fallen kind of into the story a bit, and especially very young kids. It is a very confusing time to be a pre-adolescent or a child right now. And that really segues into the next topic. And you and I have touched on this before, but it seems to be becoming more entrenched in the media, which is a frightening proposition. And it's a notion of what some are calling, in a politically, they say the politically correct term is age gap love. This came up in an interview I did recently, and more in the American media, we're talking about programs that have much older men and very young girls as the beginning point to start working toward the extremes. And this is an area you know well about. And so let's just talk about what people need to be alerted to in this particular agenda and what's going on in the movement toward the acceptance of, as you say, pedophilia.
Well, it's a deep story. We don't have time to go into it now, but I go into it in the books. There's a reason why the so-called upper echelons, I call them the cesspit echelons, of society and the elite are extraordinarily into pedophilia. And pedophilia and Satanism interconnect for reasons I explain in the books as well.
Right.
So it has to be done because of the window of collective perception in secret. Although in things like the Roman Catholic Church, of course, it's that secrecy has been breached, but we're still talking about the tip of a very large iceberg. But we are clearly, I've been looking and observing this for some time now and commenting on the internet from time to time. We are looking at a process of moving that window of public perception into an area where pedophilia becomes more and more acceptable, where you dilute it more and more in terms of a reel back horror at the thought. And, age gap love and all this stuff, these are just Orwellian terms describing pedophilia, basically. And you look at what's just happened in Britain, for instance. Is a story running today where a organization is saying that those that are found watching child pornography on the internet shouldn't be subject to criminal action, as they have been up to this point, but should go to something akin to what happens if you get a speeding ticket, in effect. And instead of getting the fine, you agree to go to some
traffic
driving course situation, something similar to that. And this is again diluting the perceptions that people have of pedophilia. And it happens across the great swathe of subjects. It's what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. You've got a goal, in this case, normalizing pedophilia, and you chip away step by step by step by step, often over a long period, until you get to that situation. And the totalitarian tiptoe is where you start at A and you know you're going to Z, and you go in steps towards Z, and you make the steps not so big that too many people are alerted to what is happening and the pattern and the direction. That totalitarian tiptoe is massively part of the whole technique of moving this window of collective perception from what it has been to what it becomes. And so, the idea, for instance, of centralizing power has always been a kind of reel back, or that don't sound good to most people. centralizing power means power in the hands of fewer and fewer people. But what you're looking at now is that perception being diluted, certainly among the progressive Soros left, using the excuse of human-caused climate change. So, I mean, back in the 90s, I was pointing out that human-caused climate change is a hoax. And people said, obviously, and quite rightly, well, why would they do that? And I said, because they want to use that as an excuse to A, centralize power on a global level to save the planet, and B, to justify imposing their will on the fine detail of your life to save the planet. And now, all these years later, of course, you've got Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, you've got the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 from the United Nations, and in this country, you've got this Extinction Rebellion, this organization with great connections into the elite, by the way, that has been shutting roads and squares in London, protesting about the fact that not enough's being done to save the world from climate change. And all of them are putting forward what needs to be done, what they demand is done, policies and changes that are straight off the pages of my books from long ago, that this is what the whole hoax is about, justifying the transformation and centralization of power in human society. And so you have a collective perception which is instinctively uneasy with centralization of power, that suddenly says, well, you know, we're probably going to need to have to do it to save the world, or do this or do that or do the other. Globalization, again, is a totalitarian tiptoe towards more and more centralization of power. So is the European Union. So wherever you look, you're seeing this drip, drip, step, step movement to move this window of collective perception into a whole new area of how people see the world and world events and what needs to be done.
It's true. And I think that there's so much for people to rail against right now. I mean, again, people are going nuts. It's like our minds are being shredded. And I say that quite literally. I'm seeing a lot of insane behavior around on a daily basis. And so, I mean, to start understanding the means by which these manipulations are occurring is number one. And then I think number two, you know, you get into this land where people watch YouTube videos all day and hear one point of view after another, have one concern after another, and become so overwhelmed they just light up a joint and then dial out from the whole thing. Where I would say it's really good to start choosing something that you actually care about. So Andrew Harvey said, what is that thing that wakes you up at 3 in the morning that you're just either angry or impassioned about it because of the injustice or possibility of it? And pick something and start putting some energy there. And the reason I've talked about pedophilia with you, in the last interview we mentioned it as well, is because it is tiptoeing up now. It is being it is starting to be promoted as acceptable on some levels. And this is one thing I think every human being can agree on. It's absolutely unacceptable. To rob the innocence from youth is unacceptable on every level, period. We have to find something that we can still stand for. What is your feeling on that? That's the more proactive end of it.
Well, yeah. But if you approach anything with the old perceptions, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
True.
And for me, what we need to do first and foremost, as a prerequisite to everything, is redefine our self-identity.
Yes.
Realize that we are not our labels. We are the consciousness having the experience we call labels. Because once you fall for my labels are me, my labels are the I, then the groups and the labels start forming which can be played off against each other for the absolute bottom line of any few controlling the many, which is divide and rule. When you have the humility with that to say, look at what Socrates in ancient Greece is supposed to have said, wisdom is knowing how little we know. Thus, when you say, I am right, on what basis are you right? On the basis of where does your information come from that gives you the perception that you are right? Have you ever heard this opinion, that opinion, that opinion? All the time, you know, people say to me, and mainstream media interviewers, they say, oh, this, that, and the other. And I say to them, how much research have you done on this subject? I've done 30 years full time. You haven't even done 30 bloody seconds. And but you have a rigid view that I must be wrong when we're not even beginning to come from the same perspective of research on the subject that you're talking about. So that rigidity, that arrogance of I am right, even though I've done no research on the subject I claim I am right about, that also has to go. Because if it doesn't, then you, not only on YouTube, but in everyday life, people are only interested in hearing things that confirm what they already believe.
True.
And I would say to people, look at that. Look at that.
Yeah.
Just do a few little statistics here. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Visible light, which is all that we can see, everything that we can see as a visual reality, is a smear of the 0.005%. Compared with the projected size of the universe, planet Earth is the equivalent of a billionth of a pinhead. Now, you tell me that within a smear of infinity and on a billionth of a pinhead compared with the projected size of the universe, and that's just one universe compared with endless universes, you tell me that you've got no more to know.
No, very true. However, let me...
Right, it's about this is what I perceive at my current level of knowledge and my current level of information. Tomorrow, I'll know more, therefore I'll understand more. Therefore, today's I am right will become a bigger sense of how I see things. So it's about humility and redefining your self-identity. That we are consciousness having the experience. This is just a brief experience within infinite forever. And how can we, within this biological computer, as I call it, which focuses our attention and perception within a narrow band of frequencies, which we're released from at what we call death, at least to some extent, larger or lesser. And therefore, how can we have this I am right arrogance, and there's no more to know. If you say something different, you must be wrong. It's extraordinary self-deceit, self-deception that's going on. That has to go. Because if it doesn't, we'll just continue as we are.
This is true. And there is yet another overlay, and that is that this incredible instrument that is, as you call it, the spacesuit or the body, the meat suit, also is hardwired with a very sublime mechanism for being able to sense. And so we all have within us, within our heart and within our guts, we have an innate sense, forget all the programming, of things that truly are damaging to the human soul and spirit. I think we can all feel that. Virtually everyone has some sense of feeling of these things. And what I'm referring to is starting to listen to this aspect of our own selves, this more sublime and subtle aspect of self over even data and information that is surrounding us, in terms of finding our way back to some really essential truths, which we've totally lost the thread to.
Well, I called the body a biological computer. I mean, you know, the level of what we experience things as compared with what they are is just fantastic. I mean, we think we live in physical bodies. We don't. We live in fields of information, which
Absolutely, yeah.
we decode into the experience of what appears to be physical. And when I say biological computer, I mean precisely that. If I program this computer in front of me to not process certain information, that information would never appear on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
You look at China, where they code the internet so that China can't get great sways of the internet that the Chinese authorities don't want them to see. And it's the same thing. And what programs this to the firewalls, creates the firewalls, are perception. Because the perception of I am right and I've got nothing more to know is a firewall, because you won't go beyond that. And so these program perceptions are firewalling us all the time, and they're focusing attention into the five senses. So people in vast numbers, it is changing, mind, but in vast numbers, can only perceive the five sense world because that's the window of their perception. And therefore, they are trying to get a fix on the world that they are experiencing within the world that they're experiencing. Talk about the blind leading the bloody blind.
Well,
And if you control the information that people receive at that level through the mainstream media, education, etc., you are going to a very, very large extent, dictate their perceptions and therefore dictate their behavior. But when you allow these programs to be breached, these bubbles of perception to be breached, and the first step is wisdom is knowing how little I know, therefore, how can I, in the circumstances I've just described, think I know all there is to know or all what I need to know? That starts to break down these firewalls of rigid belief, whether they're religious, political, financial, cultural, whatever, racial. And you can start to access levels of awareness that are beyond the program, are beyond the five senses. And then you start to look at the five sense world, and instead of it completely consuming your perception and all you can see is random events and dots, now, because you've accessed an expanded state of awareness beyond the program, these dots start forming patterns, and you start to see connections, and you start to see that the world is not like you thought it was. And that's the process that people go through in what they call awakening. You're not awakening to enlightenment. You are enlightened. You are awakening to break through the programs that firewall you off from the enlightened consciousness you are and can be. And so, of course, when you have a situation where you're in the same world as people who have gone through this process of deprogrammed awakening, and you're still in a world full of people that have not been through that process, obviously you get seen as mad, crazy, or dangerous, because they literally can't compute what you're doing, what you're saying, and how you're acting. So because it's different to their norms, their window, they are immediately wary of you and often fearful of you, because they cannot conceive what you conceive. And the way through to that realm beyond the program is here. It's what you know rather than what you think. See,
Exactly.
when you say, sorry, Regina, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, exactly. I think we're starting to parallel on that thought. To be able to throw off the yoke of this information overload, manipulation, and persuasion, even to be able to feel those subtle senses within us, those subtle feelings that are embodied with a higher truth, that enlightenment phase you talk about, which is innate to all of us, casting off all of the BS around us to be able to feel ourselves again, I really think is key to this whole thing. And that's where those feelings can start igniting a higher sense of truth again.
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, that's been the theme throughout my work from the start, is that this is the answer.
Yeah.
And it's some esoteric navel contemplating. The age-old connection of the heart to love is not by accident or
Right.
random chance. But what has happened is the nature of love itself has changed, and been suppressed and inverted. So what we call love today, and that's the kind of love that's symbolized by the physical heart, is, if you like, the love of attraction. Where you are attracted to another human being, and it can be overwhelming for many people, that attraction. It's an energetic connection, and if it stays on the level only of attraction, then when that kind of wave of attraction starts to wane, then there's nothing left that we call love. And in fact, it can get very antagonistic between two people who were formerly, quote, in love. For me, the best symbol of love that this energetic heart is about, that's been usurped by the idea of the physical heart, is friendship. There's a great line about a friend is someone who walks into the room when everyone else is walking out. It's if you look at friendship love, it's not founded on attraction alone, or even attraction at all on that physical sense. It's something infinitely deeper, and it's without condition. A friend is someone who'll tell you what you don't want to hear, even though they know they're going to get a mouthful back. A friend will stand there beside you, even though you've done something the friend vehemently doesn't agree with, but they'll stand with you anyway. That's love in its true sense. That's unconditional love that doesn't require attraction and doesn't require a contract. And it's this friendship love that I'm talking about. And when we open the heart, the energetic heart, we enter and connect with the realm of knowing. I mean, look at the body language. When people say, I'm thinking, they point to their head, because that's where thought, a very low level of awareness, by the way,
yes,
operates. But when they say, I know, their hands go here. They're instinctively going where the source of that is coming from. I just know. When people are talking about their intuition, I just know. They don't go, I'm thinking. They go, I'm thinking. And I can only look at my own life, and the transformation of my own life over the last 30 years has been a movement from here to here. This now serves this. It's not the governor. My intuition has led me to so much information, which this would have said, oh, what are you going there for? What are you doing that for? What will people think if you do that? And you go because you know, and you realize when you get there why you're there. Whereas this can have a list of reasons why you shouldn't go. And I went through a a phenomenal point back in the 1990s when this and this came together, where I'd gone with my intuition, knowing, I know I've got to do this, I know. And it had got me into some scrapes, because why wouldn't it? Because this does not see the world like this. This is your Overton window. This is air. And therefore, when you break free from it, you're going to do things that this wouldn't do. And given we're living in a world, although, like I say, it's changing, where still the great majority are coming from here, they're going to perceive what you're doing coming from here is crazy or mad or dangerous. But what happened to me is that there came a point where this has observed this for long enough that when you go with it, you get into some scrapes and challenges, but it all works out, not despite what has happened, but because of it, the good and the bad. And this come together. So when this says, I just know I've got to do this, this says, okay, let's go. The war stops. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal feeling, because what happens is you feel no to do something, to say something, and you don't have a censor that's telling you why you shouldn't do it, why you shouldn't say it. And here's the word that doesn't occur when you go from here: consequences. This is the land of consequences. This is terrified of consequences, this and this, the emotions, terrified of consequences. So this says, I know I've got to do this. I know I've got to say this. Oh yeah, but what are the consequences of doing that? When this and that comes together, that doesn't happen. When this says, I know I have to do this, you do it, you say it. You don't think of consequences. This is the thing. What is self-censorship? Which is an epidemic today. It's an expression of, but what are the consequences of me having my own opinion?
I agree, David. And the fact is, the heart always knows what's truly unacceptable. Going back to that Overton window, if we're listening, you can't be manipulated by those, political perceptions and media persuasion if we're here. And that's all I'm saying about that, is breaking it. And I love what you had to say. I love what you said about friendship. I mean, truly, in an ideal situation, we would begin joining together in the true spirit of friendship and simply no longer accept the unacceptable. Things would change rapidly. But it seems that it's a tall task out there at large, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I open my mouth, and what comes out is what I believe, what I feel. And if people don't like that and what I say and how I see the world, then that's fair enough. That's their right. But funnily enough, they want to censor me, but I don't want to censor them.
Right.
So where's the point of tyranny? I want the free flow of information. See, people who are confident of what they stand for and what they say, they welcome debate. They welcome the free flow of information because they have confidence in that what they're saying has some validity. People who don't have that confidence, they want to shut the debate down, which is why we're talking about what happened earlier. So it's so important. And again, when you come back from who I am is my labels, and what does that mean? What does that say? Who I am is my labels. It also includes, what will other labels think of me if I do this or say this? Yeah. So again, consequences. So, I don't want bad consequences, so I won't do it and I won't say it. Once the consequence fear goes, because hey, I'm a point of attention with an infinite awareness. When I leave this body, I'm going to go on exploring forever. So I'm concerned about consequences in this tiny little experience we call a human life. I'm caring and censoring myself because of what someone might say because I have a different opinion to them. what? But you fall for the labels, and it's a totally different perceptual point from which you observe the same perception of consequences. So people will see when they read my new book, which I've just finished, just going into print. It's coming out in September. It's called The Trigger. They'll see how much I care about consequences and how much I fear consequences.
David, you haven't cared about consequences for many decades, which is why they did the film called The Renegade on you.
The thing is that if you look at my experience, there was a time, and it's shown in the movie, when I couldn't walk down any street in Britain without being laughed at. A comedian only had to say my name to get a laugh. No joke was necessary. And it seemed as if your life was over. And people perceived your life to be over. Oh, you'll never recover from that. But you keep speaking your truth, and you keep speaking your truth no matter what. You don't think about consequences. People used to say to me, didn't you know that people would ridicule you if you said that? And I'm thinking, yeah, do you know, I'd worked that out. But I didn't, so I'm going to censor myself on what I feel is right and what I've researched because of what someone might think I'm crazy or going through a midlife crisis. I mean, what? To me, you see, that is like, huh? But if you're stuck in the world of labels and how other people see you, that concern with how you're seen consumes your life. It runs your life. The prison that most people live in is the fear of what other people think. It completely defines them. And I say, these kids, it saddens me so much when I see the suicide rate of young people going up. It's going up very quickly in Britain. And where kids have taken their own life because of some abuse they've had on social media or at school or whatever. I mean, kids, don't let other people define you. Define yourself. You are a point of attention, an infinite expression of consciousness on an infinite journey exploring forever, forever. It's just an experience. So some idiot says you're this or says you're that. So what? Someone gave me some great advice a long time ago. They said, what do you gain by winning an argument with an idiot? You can't win an argument with an idiot because they never know when they've lost. But this is the point. What people say about us is not the point. That's not the power. The power is how we respond to what people say about us. This is where the power lies. If you allow that what people say about you or do about you to overpower you, then that can only happen because you have given your power to that which is abusing you. Personally, I refuse to do that. People abuse me, and I just said, well, thanks for sharing that with me. Have a nice day. Couldn't care. It's because it doesn't matter. It only matters if I make it matter by allowing that to impact upon me. And I see people get more and more frustrated because they want to hurt you. They want to see a reaction that you're hurt, and you're not.
Exactly.
They're like the Rumble in the Jungle or whatever it was with George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, where they just punch themselves out. Because, try some more abuse. That hasn't worked. Try another angle. Abuse me another way. No, that hasn't worked either.
But David, you're being... I'm sorry, I was going to say, but this is changing, and even in your life. I mean, since Renegade, your film has come out, we're talking before the interview, and it's doing extraordinarily well in Britain, the very place that used to kind of giggle behind you. As you said, you used to walk to the sound of distant laughter. Not so much anymore. You've kept telling your truth all of these years. And I have to say, as a person, I've spent a good amount of time around you personally, and people that know that will say, what's he really like? And I always say the same thing. You have an amazingly, you do not have a sense of self-importance about you at all in your everyday life. You're a guy who is living, I think you really truly live your talk. I don't find you to be judgmental. I've always found you to be very inviting in of anybody, any little old lady in the coffee shop that strikes up a conversation with you over a muffin, doesn't know who you are. You're so amenable, but mostly you do not have this sense of self-importance. And I so appreciate that about you, considering what you've taken on and the number of years you have taken it on. I mean, I find that probably your most beautiful trait. I just had to say.
Well, the thing is that, first of all, from where I'm coming from, once you realize what's going on in the world and where it's being taken, walking away is never an option. So I always find it's very strange when people enter this arena and their star flies for a while, their flavor of the month for a year or two, and then they disappear. I'm thinking, where have they gone? How can you walk away? When you say you know what's going on, you can't walk away from that. And the thing about self-importance, it's a funny thing, an apparent paradox, but it's not. That the more that you understand that you are an expression of infinite awareness, and if you open yourself to the maximum extent, you are that infinite awareness in its entirety, the less this self-important stuff affects you, because you realize that whether you are someone who is perceived as important, or whether you are someone who is not, someone homeless or someone who works on the checkout down the store, the labels may be different, the experience may be different, but the I is the same.
Indeed.
And ultimately, those that I am exposing are an expression, a distorted expression, I would say at this time, of the same I that everything else is, every tree is, every breath of air is. So this whole idea of self-importance comes from labels. My label is more important than yours. You just drive a bus. I run a bank. Just a different experience, darling. That's all it is.
Indeed.
Get used to it. And therefore, whether you are a prince or a pauper, as the saying goes, it's all the same to me, because you're just an expression of consciousness, like I am, the same consciousness ultimately.
Indeed. I just applaud you for that, for being able to, because you're living that, for being able to stay within that understanding throughout all these years. And David, I want to thank you so much for your time. So your new book is coming out in September, The Trigger, The Renegade You. That's already out, and we can find it on a couple of different platforms, I understand. But first of all, we can find it through your site, right?
People go to davidicke.com. They can watch it now. It's an hour and 40 minutes. It's a feature film that's been made with a feature film company on feature film technology and feature film quality, and I'm absolutely delighted with it. I didn't edit it, but I'm delighted with what they did. And the book, it's just I don't usually kind of push my books, but there's something about this one. It's called The Trigger. It's going to be available for pre-order in very early August. And this is a book that really I'd like to see a lot of pre-orders, and I'll tell you for why. I don't know what's going to happen once it enters the public arena. And I want as many in circulation as possible before that point is reached. It actually is officially launched and becomes available publicly on September the 11th, which might give you an idea of some of the subject matter. But it's not just about that. It's if people think I've been demonized up to this point, well, strap in. You've seen nothing yet. And if people think I've been controversial up to this point, well, do the same. So I really want to get as many of these books in the hands of thinking people before it enters the public arena, because it is seriously controversial.
That's going some from you. David says his own book is controversial. David, thank you so much. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to get a copy of that book, and once I've had a chance to read it, if you would please come back on again, and we'll talk about the contents. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right.
All right. Thanks again, David. Wonderful to see you again.
As always.
Again, everybody, you can go to davidicke.com, find all of that information about Renegade. Also start looking for the book in August for pre-orders. And until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com. Thank you for watching this video. You can find many more like it free of charge by going to reginameredith.com. And if you're finding that this kind of content is adding value to your life, you might want to support my work by clicking on the Patreon button on the website, reginameredith.com. As a patron, you have special videos, insider commentary, and much more. Check it out.